also mentioned ways of contributing, like creating a new project when something doesn't exist yet. So you did create a new project in 1994, the FreeDOS project, which still exists. So a huge congratulations to the community and you on the 30-year anniversary of the project. It is amazing. Having something around for 30 years, open source or not, that's not trivial and not easy. Creating an open source project and the community and ecosystem around it is challenging enough in itself, but sustaining it for 30 years and, continuing, that is just a whole nother level. You started that project sort of shortly after you first started to contribute to open source. How did you decide to create that project and how hard was it?
So yeah, and it got an interesting start. So backing up, I'd used PCs since the first one, 1981, right? And I had an Apple II that my brother and I taught ourselves how to do programming on, and then we got a PC when the PC came out, and so we used DOS from the early days, and DOS had a lot of great applications, and I used DOS all through the years. Every version that came out, we got a new version of DOS, and DOS 5 I thought was just an outstanding update because everything was, a lot of things were being put in color, by default. Like the editor was like really flashy. It wasn't this Edlin anymore, and you had a basic environment that was really cool looking. And I was kind of a big DOS user, right, throughout the 80s into the 1990s. And I mentioned earlier in 1993 is when I first got into open source and Emacs, and then I installed Linux, SLS Linux on my home computer. And so it's like what got me though was like, this is a really powerful system. It's Unix, but it runs on my home computer. And when you realize that Linus Torvalds was an undergraduate student as well when he made it. And you've got people who are contributing to Linux and the other tools that are on Linux, the GNU tools and whatnot from all over, and releasing it for free. It was just like, that's really cool. Well, I was, even though I installed Linux on my home computer, I was dual booting. And so I dual boot back into DOS whenever I run. So if I needed to write a paper for class, I was probably booting back into DOS. If I needed to do spreadsheet analysis for my computer labs, definitely I was booting back into DOS for that. And so I was doing DOS a lot. And even though I really liked using Linux, I also still loved using DOS. And I'd written a lot of DOS tools on my own, right? Well, 1994, around, I don't know, March, April, I remember reading a lot of these magazine articles where they're talking with Microsoft about what the next version of Windows is going to be. And they were saying, well, the next version of Windows is going to completely do away with DOS. Because you need to remember back then, Windows was this shell that ran on top of DOS, right? And so you had DOS and then you installed Windows on top of it. And so it was, Windows 3 was the version back then. It was okay. But it wasn't good. And I didn't like it. It was slow. It was clunky. If one application misbehaved, there goes Windows. Windows is down. Reading these articles, they're like, hey, DOS is going away with our next version of Windows. I was like, wow, if Windows 4 or 3.2 looks anything like Windows 3.1, I want nothing to do with it. I would rather keep running DOS. And so I asked around. I said, hey, has anybody written like a free version of DOS, like an open source version of DOS, kind of like what they did with Linux? And because I don't want to go the Windows route. I don't want to be pushing to Windows. I'd rather keep running my DOS applications. Got lots of those. And people were like, we're not aware of anybody doing that, but that's a great idea, and you should do it. And I was a physics major, not a computer science major, so I didn't know how big of a thing that was. And I always tell people, because I was naive, because I didn't know any better, I thought I can do that, right? Linus Torvalds had done that with Linux. We could do that with DOS, and I was very excited to do it. And because of that, if you don't know what you don't know, you actually could do a lot.